Good evening. The clock on the wall says it's 7:30. I'm glad to be back in your midst again. I pray that I find everyone doing well in the midst of this COVID-19. I think God is still blessing us. As a matter of fact, I know God is still blessing us. Even in the midst of this trouble, God is still blessing us. I got something I want to talk about tonight. It's a story in the book of 2 Kings. I believe it's around the 4th chapter. It's a story about a young lady who's been put in a tough situation. And we know single mothers are always in a tough situation, but her story is quite compelling. She was not only a single mother, but she also was a widow, a recent widow. Her husband had how you doing, Miss Murray? Her husband had been a godly man of whom everybody liked and everybody admired him. And when he passed away, he left behind a loving wife and 2 sons. The woman had no real way to work. She couldn't take care of her sons. He left them in a whole lot of debt, and he didn't have any life insurance, so it was really, really messed up. How you doing, Miss Deidre? Brother Eldridge Green. The woman had no way to take care of her sons, and she found herself being poor overnight. She had debts that she couldn't pay, and she lived in a place where people didn't treat those in debt very well. Cash was tight for everybody, so there was no mercy for her. The widow was staring down the possibility of her 2 sons being sold into slavery until her bills had been paid. And in her culture, that kind of thing happened all the time. She cried until she couldn't cry no more. She had nothing left inside of her but desperation. This widowed mother was at the end of herself, and she was down to one not so promising idea. She was down to a point where she didn't know what to do. She had to go visit the preacher. You know, we always make the preacher our last resort. You know how it is, baby. We don't want to go to the preacher. We don't want the preacher knowing too much of our business. But she had got to the point where the only person she could go back to see was the preacher. And see, after all, her husband had worked with the preacher. Her and her husband had a good relationship. He would feel some loyalty and help her find some kind of financial relief. Well, she said, I'm at my wit's end, is what she told the preacher. We've already lost everything, and my boys are all I have left now. That's all I have, but they'll be gone, and the house will be gone if I don't come up with some money real fast. My boys are going to die in slavery without me ever seeing them again, and I'll be in a gutter begging for coins or maybe doing something even worse. You know how my husband loved and served the Lord, she told this preacher. The 2 of you ministered together, and surely God won't look away from us now, or maybe you won't look away from us now. That's what she said to the preacher. So the preacher reached over and gently wiped away a few of the woman's tears. He said, I'm so sorry for what you're going through. What have you got left? And she looked at him kind of puzzled. Was he actually demanding me to pay him? Nothing, she said. I have nothing. And began to cry all over again. Nothing but walls and floors, that's what she said. I sold it all, empty rooms filled with memories and nothing else. I think there's one little flask of oil left on the shelf. But the preacher, whose name was Elisha, told her to go door to door, ask your neighbors to lend you any kind of empty jars that they have. Then he said, place the jars on the floor and close up the room. Then get the olive oil that you have left and begin pouring. How could that possibly work? She asked. And he said, have faith. And he just looked at her and smiled. Well, some hours later, the room was filled with jars, and the jars were filled with oil. The boys were laughing as they ran from jar to jar, and the little flask just kept giving and giving. And then the last drop fell at the rim of the last jar. The 3 of them began begging and crying and jumping up and down. When you sell the oil, the preacher told her, I think you'll find your debts paid and just have enough left to live on. And you know, the preacher was right. But the question I want to ask tonight is, what's in your jar? What's in your jar? This story that is a reminder that God loves to fill up empty things, whether it's a jar of oil or just a measure of hope. Jars are made for filling. They don't fill themselves, but they receive what is poured into them. All jars begin with emptiness. And it's much the same with us, especially what we're going through these last few weeks. Is much the same with us. We looking for a stimulus check, but our jars are empty. We looking for the preacher to do something, but our jars are empty. It's the same for us right now today. The measure of filling we receive is in direct proportion to our level of emptiness. It's highly likely that there are readers our listeners tonight who have come to the end of themselves, to the place of emptiness. Have you reached a point during this that you have come to a point of emptiness? And if you have, I'm sure that wasn't your plan. Life has a way of pouring us out, and it has nothing to do with what we want it to happen. Life takes away someone we love. Life takes away a home, a job. It can reach under your skin and take away your health. It can take away your hope. And at some point, we're left holding what feels a lot like nothing. And we hold on to it with clenched fists. We don't want to let nothing go. We feel a surge of unwanted emotions. We're fearful. We're angry. We have resentment. We're lonely. And ultimately, the worst emotional state of all is emptiness. We feel nothing. We're done. Then we get into a thing that's called despair. But what if that emptiness means God has us right where he wants us to be? Somebody's looking at me like, Rev, you are tripping tonight. I don't have anything. How can God have me right where he wants me to be? What would the emotions be if we could perceive one small glimmering truth? We're in position for the most wonderful thing that could happen in life. A close encounter with a loving God who has in-depth, sweeping plans for blessing us in ways we never could imagine. When life takes away, that's when God gives. See, the soothing oil of his incredible love seeps into the aching cavity of a shattered life. And then you can begin. I also suspect that there are more than a few jars out here that are full to the brim. We prove it by pointing to our calendars, booked solid, probably overbooked. All of the good life seems to be running over the brim because we just can't contain all the stuff life has brought us. And then the bottom falls out and we wonder where everything went. Before we were saying everything is all good. At Thanksgiving, we sit at the table and talk about how full our lives are, and how hours later we talk about how full our stomachs are. Life is loaded, and we thank God for everything. But what if some of that load is counterproductive to the God part of things? I better say that again. But what if some of that load is counterproductive to the God part of things? See, there's nothing wrong with a good job, nothing wrong with a good marriage. There's nothing wrong with having a busy agenda. I started off this year looking at my calendar. People were calling and asking me to come and speak here and come to speak here and come to speak there. It even happened way before the new year came to us. And then all of a sudden, something called the COVID-19 pops on the scene. Something pops on the scene called a COVID-19, and now everybody's calling saying, Rev, don't worry about it. Rev, don't worry about this. Rev, don't worry about that. We might do it later on in the year. I'm just wondering what's there that is really significant, things that will matter 10 or 20 years from now. What's there in my calendar that's going to last me and hold me through the tough times? When the calendar pages are dust in the wind, what's going to hold me? I want to explore with you the difference between a jar that is full and a jar that is filled. Two differences, one being full and one being filled. I need y'all to walk with me one time, because Jesus loves to fill things that are empty. See, God is a filler of empty spaces. And Jesus was a living picture of what that means. See, in his very first public miracle, just recorded in John 2, we find Jesus changing water into wine. It's a wedding party going on, so it's been carefully planned. But the host receives word from the servant that the wine is running far too low, far too early. And that culture going dry would be an unforgivable social blunder. These weddings weren't like our afternoon affairs. A wedding was a 7-day party. And the wine was supposed to last throughout the whole 7 days. Running out would expose the host to being ridiculed by the public. Once again, we have empty jars. Jesus asked for 6 of them to be filled with water, which he then changes that water into wine. I heard the old preacher say sometimes somewhere in between the pouring and the sipping, the water turns into wine. What John is trying to tell us, however, is that Jesus doesn't fill the jars with just any wine, but he fills them with the best wine. I need y'all to talk back to me right here. The bridegroom is then commended for saving the best wine for last, a rarity at these functions. Because, see, Jesus doesn't just fill emptiness. He fills emptiness with joy and abundance of joy. In John 4, Jesus finds a woman by a well. Her life is empty. He feels it. In John 6, he faces a vast crowd of growling stomachs. He fills every last one of those stomachs. In the home of Jairus, he finds the emptiness of loss as a daughter has died. And Jesus fills the house with joy by bringing this daughter back to life. He saves a woman caught in adultery and fills her empty days with a hope she has never even known before. We could run through every pages of the gospel, and in the whirlwind of people and teaching and miracles, we find there's really one story that makes it all work out. Jesus fills. See, some of the characters we meet walk away empty. The rich young ruler, for instance, had no room amid his riches. The Pharisees listened carefully to his teaching, but they were too invested in laws and rituals and ideas that could not be cleared away. Emptying is never painless, and not everyone is willing to go there. Jesus is eager and willing to fill, but someone else has to make the room. He wants to fill your empty spots. Whoever's listening to me tonight, you might have an empty spot, and Jesus wants to fill it. He wants to fill it, but you have to make room for him to fill. I always say Jesus wants to be, God wants to be at the top of our list. He wants to be all the way at the top. I say Jesus, family, church work, I got to shuffle. But Jesus is not going to put himself at the top of the list. You have to put him at the top of the list. He's not going to just climb to the top and sit at the top like he's head honcho, most boss. But if you put him at the top, he can work wonders in your life. If you're empty, I ask you to ask him to fill you. If you got stuff going on in your life that you can't get together, I'm telling you, have a little talk with Jesus. Tell him all about your troubles. He'll hear your faintest cry, and he'll answer by and by. I got to get out of here, but I hope something was done and something was said for you to be able to make a little room for him. Make a little room for him. We ain't got nothing else to do. We sit in the house all day. Some of us going to work. We're blessed to go to work. Some of us just sitting around all day. Make a little room for Jesus. Make a little room for him. Pick up your Bible. Read a little about him. Make a little space in your heart for him. Let him impregnate you with the possibility that you can do anything in your life that you choose to do. But you have to make time for him. Make room for him. He wants to get in, but you got to open up the door and let him in. May God bless you. I love you. Have a wonderful night.